Well, it's a Monday, and the Stable Cyclist Podcast is in your feed, and that can only mean one thing. We got an emergency or a really breaking episode to bring you. And so far over the past 12 months, I have brought you nearly every guest, or host, I should say, from the Bonk Bros podcast. I have had Dylan Johnson on the Stable Cyclist twice. I have had Drew Dillman on twice, including our very first emergency episode. I have had Adam Sabin on and Tyler Cloutier, and all of them have told me, as well as many of you, you got to get Scott McGill in the hot seat. Well, folks, I have landed the white whale. The one that everybody said was impossible to get here, I got him here. In fact, this conversation was recorded about 1 hour after I initially reached out to him and basically dared him to come on. This one is shorter than normal, but it is extremely full of quality. And for those of you that have been looking forward to it, it does indeed complete the Bonk Bro set. Well, Scott McGill, this is a real treat. You are the white whale of the Bonk Bros that I've been told would be impossible to get on the pod. And here we are. And the best part about all of this is I believe that we talked to each other for the first time like an hour ago to make this plan happen. So,
yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I want to get started, and yes, of course, we're going to talk about Bonk Bros eventually, but I have a few other questions. And, you know, in doing my research for this, not just in the last hour, but in the last few months, there's not a lot of podcasts about you, and all the ones out there have to do with you at the World Championships, and that's it. And I think there's a lot more to you than that. So I guess I just want to get started with kind of like what's your origin story or your like zero to hero? How did you get from like not ever riding a bike to like this is my career?
Well, I guess I've kind of always ridden a bike. I started cycling like when I was, 8 years old, basically mountain biking with my dad. That's kind of how I got started into it. And then, obviously I wanted to do competitions, so started doing races when I was 10 years old, and then kind of switched over to more road racing when I was around 16 or so, but still dabbled in everything from cyclocross to mountain biking in college, and still mountain bike, just don't really compete that much, just do it for fun. So yeah, that's kind of how I, got into it. So I, have been doing it basically my whole life.
And there was a point you said where you really got into it in road racing, like in high school, but you went off to Brevard College, I believe, and they're really well known for cycling. What did that really amplify things for you and really push you there? Or are you a guy too, like no shame in this? Did you go to that college to basically ride your bike more?
That's basically what drew me to the college, because other than that, there's no way you would even find out that it exists, because there's only, 700 students or whatever. But it did end up being like a phenomenal place to train, and like with the cycling team, like that was all my friends, so we were just always kind of riding together, and like where if you went to a college where cycling wasn't kind of like a mainstream sport almost, it'd be easy to kind of give it up, I guess, or to not take it as seriously, because everybody you'd be associating yourself with is not a cyclist. Where like in high school, I was the only cyclist in the whole entire school. Anybody who like even probably rode a bike, like even around their neighborhood, nobody did that. Right. So it wasn't like a super common thing. So I didn't have any friends really to ride with. Where then when I went to college, it was like, I had all these training partners, or like if my bike was broken, somebody could help me fix it, stuff, random stuff like that. So yeah, it definitely helped going to a school like that, and then it also helped that it was a great location to train. You could train almost through the winter without riding the trainer at all. And then the road riding is phenomenal. The mountain biking is phenomenal. I still go down there a lot to train in the wintertime. Might not make it down this year. We'll see. But yeah, that's pretty much it to that story.
Sweet. So you head off to Brevard, and you are in this community where it's all bikes all the time, because it can be. And why does the road pull you so much? So many of your friends have been drawn into gravel and mountain biking, but you've really stuck to the road scene and becoming a professional. So how do we get from Brevard to you being professional on the road?
I started, riding, doing more road races just to try something different, I guess, versus mountain bike racing. And then there's obviously just more, if you do both disciplines, there's just more races you can choose from. And then I think what maybe drew me more to the side of road racing is just that I was better at it than any other discipline. And it's also kind of, growing up as a American, you kind of watch, that's kind of like the highest level of the sport in my eyes was road racing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I wanted to, that's what I was like dreaming of essentially. Mountain biking was also like televised when I was, on like Red Bull TV and stuff. So I still followed that, but it wasn't, it was just like there was more opportunity, I guess, road racing. Versus mountain biking.
So there's this like sense of adventure. I know I've heard you mention a few years ago you had raced your bike on 5 continents by the end of the season. Is there still that sense of adventure of getting to go to all these places, even though you're doing a job at this point, but you're getting to see all these cool things? How much of that just still plays into the joy of that like inner young kid?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's funny because doing races, like especially some of the races that we're doing, which aren't the biggest UCI races in the world, but still big professional races. You go to places that you would never normally end up. So like you don't go, like I would never go to half the places that we end up going. Like if I was just going to go on a vacation or something. So you kind of see more of like reality of how places, how people actually live, because you're staying in, some not nice hotel in the middle of France or something, and you're eating like the worst food possible. So it just happens to be in France where that's typically the case. But like we went, I spent a lot of time in Turkey, which was a really cool place, phenomenal riding, affordable. But I would never like think to just go there if I, had any place in the world to go, So that's kind of the cool part about being, I guess, a continental level cyclist is you just go to all these random places, and then you're kind of hanging out with your friends too the whole time. So, because like my, Project Echelon's we're all super close and everybody's good friends. So it's pretty, it ends up being kind of like a little, I don't want to say a vacation, but you're there to race, but then also it's just like you're kind of on an adventure together, we'll say.
For sure. So you are on Project Echelon right now, and is that through this coming 2025 as well?
Yeah.
Okay. A few years back, you were on a team, and Mike Creed was one of your directors, I believe, or he was running the team, if I'm not mistaken it. And to me, Mike Creed has always been this like really interesting like disruptor to the scene, and like has been able to take a lot of these smaller teams. I think when he had Smart Stop, I believe that was their name a few years back, and they won all the national titles that year. Why is he so different as a DS, as a director, compared to a lot of other people? And what I guess, what is he like?
It's a tough question. What is he like? He's I've had a lot of good directors, so it's hard to say that he's a better director. Or I mean, all the directors I've had have been good. So, but yeah, he's definitely one of those guys who like maybe he didn't achieve maybe his full potential during his career, and he made a lot of mistakes. So he is trying to help people avoid those mistakes, or his riders avoid those mistakes. Which,
Sure.
If say you had a guy who was just, a really successful cyclist, and they were able to, pedal their way out of any situation and did everything right, they're not necessarily going to be the best guy to help you, if you're not the most talented rider or not, the most committed rider or something like that. So having a guy who's maybe made some mistakes, and he'll help, to teach you to avoid them or shortcuts to avoid them.
Sure. So a lot of people hear Brevard College in your past, and if they're like Dylan Johnson fanboys, they're going to think immediately, oh, you must have gone to college together. But I think you were there after he graduated. Is that correct?
We overlapped like a year or a semester or something. So yeah, we went to school together. But yeah.
Okay. So there is I guess a lot of people want to know, like, how did the Bonk Bros get started? And we get the polished version from Adam and Dylan. I want to hear your version of how did you guys get started with this? Because originally it was just you three.
Yeah, I guess it was just, you end up talking to each other a lot, riding or just hanging out. So we were like, oh, we should just like record this. And I didn't think, when I originally agreed to do it, I didn't think anyone was going to listen. So now all these people, like in other countries, people come up to me and say, oh, I listened to your podcast. I'm like, oh, why are you listening to that? It's like, I'm not like an influencer type, and I don't really like being an influencer, but yeah, I guess if you start a podcast and you kind of want people to listen to it, but I didn't think anyone would. And then, yeah, Adam is kind of just like a level-headed person to also talk some but make sure it doesn't get out of hand, I guess.
Fair enough. So Dylan had told me earlier when I was talking to him that I should ask you about when you and him were roommates. If and what a wild experience that was. Drew has talked about being in Dylan's house for the first time and wondering how this guy's successful. So this is like fair game on Dylan. But yeah, Dylan said to ask you about when you and him were roommates.
I guess you could call us roommates. It was just more me staying at Dylan's house and not leaving for a while. This was in like 2021. So kind of like the racing hadn't started up yet, and I was just staying down in Brevard for a long time. And my then girlfriend was going to App State, so I was like close enough to visit her, but then obviously it's a lot colder up there, so I wasn't like training there full time. So yeah, it was not the cleanest place to live, that's for sure. I don't know, Dylan spends a lot of time just sitting around doing nothing. I don't even think he had a TV. He would just sit in the dark by himself as like his entertainment. Or you'd go in and he would just be sitting there in the dark with no stimulation going on.
I always think it's funny when I listen to you guys. They give you a really hard time about how you just, you're kind of not like them. And ultimately, I look at all the stories I've heard you tell on podcasts and all the stories just from observing. You're this pro-continental guy. You kind of have to fly by the seat of your pants. Even how this interview came about, I've heard you say that like the nutrition for your rides is whatever was in your parents' house. Like you fly by the seat of your pants. They're these super, super rigid guys. And, like Dylan has made his life out of marginal gains and clipping hairs off of tires. Why is that so much for you, your personality, that works? That like, yeah, I can just show up or find out. Even when you qualified for Worlds, I think you said you registered the last day available before you could do it. Why is that work for you versus how everybody else is viewed within that group?
Yeah, like I would say cycling's obviously a big part of my life, but it's definitely not like my whole identity. I do other hobbies and stuff. So maybe I'm, sacrificing a bit of my performance there with not weighing all my food or, being so rigid about, like, I still train super hard. I train as hard as anybody else. Like, I don't, but I just don't, I just kind of do it on my own. I don't necessarily talk about it all the time. Because I still want to be fit and be a good cyclist, but I don't necessarily want to sacrifice everything else in life, because, some guys sacrifice relationships or, other activities just for cycling, which, like, you still have to, with all the travel and everything. You're not really around as much to keep in touch with friends at home or family members or stuff like that. But can be a good balance there. And I think that's kind of why I'm kind of always at, you could say 90 or 95% throughout the year, where I might not reach those. Yeah. I have some good days and bad days, but I seem to be able to not have super bad days or get burned out like that, because I just kind of always am taking these little mini breaks mentally and physically. Yeah. Doing other stuff like, just going on a hunting trip or going to the beach or whatever.
Yeah, that was my next question, is what are the things, you said you have other hobbies, what are the things you like to do to kind of keep that balance?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's like, one of the, I am a big hunter like just hunting and fishing. But that takes a lot of time and energy. Yeah. But it's one of the reasons I stopped doing cyclocross, is just because that's during hunting season. So it's hard to balance those two, because if you're going to go hunting, you got to wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and then to go training after that, and have your nutrition dialed and everything is not really possible. But this year we bought a house that's required a lot of work, so I've spent my off season learning how to do construction and doing it, which has been an interesting process. But
awesome. And when you say you just got married this past year, is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, in October.
Okay. So real recently. Awesome. What is your upcoming year look like for you with Project Echelon, and like what are you really looking forward to versus some of those targets that might be like very much moving?
So this year will look pretty similar to last year, where we'll start in Mallorca and then do Valencia, which are 2 really big races and very hard races, because everyone's coming off like their winter training camps and all that, and a lot of guys are very motivated and going really well. So we start at those races, which are kind of like the biggest races we'll do all year. Then we'll do a few 0.2 races in Europe, so like a more of a continental field, no World Tour team. So that's kind of our opportunity to try to win some races. And then do the American stage races, so Redlands, Tour of the Gila, and Joe Martin are kind of the 3 big American stage races left. And then Nationals will be probably like my biggest goal. Last year was, I had probably the best day I've ever had on the bike for sure. Was close to making it to the sprint for the win, but unfortunately was dropped on one of the last climbs, and ended up 4th. The Nationals road race is probably the biggest goal of the year. And then after that, there's a few other races in North America, and then we'll see kind of how the last part of the season goes with what races we get into, because that's a big part of it too. Is like you're not guaranteed any starts in these races. You have to be invited, so you can't plan too far in advance. But as far as like other race targets, I don't necessarily like pick a race out and try to be, I'm trying to be good for all of them, but you kind of have to take your opportunities where they come, where like you don't know what the race situation is going to be like. And if you're if you're training through a race, you could get an opportunity, but then if you're too tired to take advantage of it, right, because you trained the week before 30 hours or whatever, then you're going to miss that opportunity. So at this level, you kind of have to try to be as good as you can the year round, and then take your opportunities when you can get them.
How long did it take you to kind of learn that flexibility in your training? Because like you said, you're trying to sit around that like 92 to 95%, of 100% all the time. But like, obviously that took a while to like learn that method, I would guess.
I mean, it's kind of just always how my lifestyle has been, like, where I won't like panic if something comes up where I have to take a couple days off,
Sure.
You just kind of take all these little mini breaks all the time, and then you're, fresher for when and then there'll be a 2-week period where I'm like, all right, super motivated. I want to train super hard for this 2 weeks, and then go to a race and see where the form's at. So I wouldn't say like I am consciously doing that. It's more just that's kind of what ends up happening.
Yeah. Are you still coaching athletes too, Scott?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, that helps to
Okay.
pay the bills.
Yeah, absolutely. How does that, like, because obviously like what you're doing is very much not how most people, especially amateurs, are targeting races and looking at things like A races and all that. How have you been able to bring some maybe more balance into what they're doing, or bring some of your experiences into what people that you're coaching are doing?
Yeah, definitely. Like, one thing is a lot of guys, want to target one race. It's typically these days it's some gravel event like Unbound or Leadville or something. And something I suggest is to do other events and always have something planned for after that race. So one, if it goes super well, it's like, well, I just succeeded at this, and then afterwards you're like, kind of, now what? What do I do now? Or if it goes poorly, then you have you don't put all your eggs in that basket. You can, like reflect on what went wrong, what went well, and then get ready for the next race or event. So, yeah, avoiding putting all your eggs in one basket, and, having 2 or 3 big, I guess, targets throughout the year is, something that I've learned, especially just more mentally than anything, just in case it goes really well or in case it goes, poorly.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that you kind of had to put cyclocross down in order to just kind of pursue some personal interest. How hard of a decision was that? And do you ever have to have that conversation with some of your athletes, or do you think more athletes need to have those conversations with themselves where they put some things down in the racing world so they can have a better personal life?
Not anyone that I worked with necessarily is doing like too much excessively, but for me, like I did, if I'm doing 60 to 70 race days a year on the road, maybe we'll say 50 to 60 race days a year, it's kind of a lot to then do cyclocross and to manage. And then at the level of support that you get for cross these days, like you need to have multiple mechanics, and because it's so much equipment, you need like 8 or 9 sets of wheels, 2 or 3 bikes, and then everything gets ruined every weekend. So if you're doing all your own mechanic work, washing all your own bikes and all that, it can, take its toll. Not necessarily just the racing, but the logistics of it all. So that's kind of just something I had to cut out. And then it's also like committing to the whole season. I would love to like do a few races at the end of the road season, because I'm already, relatively fit most of the time. But it's kind of just a lot of equipment to ask of sponsors to give you to do a handful of races. So yeah, it's just kind of, maybe I'll get back to it one day, but for now, just focus on the road racing.
Yeah, that you mentioned sponsors. You're on Project Echelon, so I'm guessing, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but you probably at this point don't have to go out and hunt a lot of your own sponsors. But in the cross world, sometimes you would. Is that a relief right now to not have to go chase all that yourself and just kind of show up and here's what I have to work with?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say getting sponsors is one of my strengths. So, Yeah, it's nice to just you join a team like every road team. You join the team, and they have the sponsors essentially, and then they provide you with equipment and all that nutrition, clothing, all that. So these guys, especially in like the gravel world, who do the privateer thing, that's a huge undertaking to manage all those relationships, make sure you're fulfilling all your sponsors' requests, and make sure you have no conflicting sponsors and all that. So yeah, to have the team kind of handle all that, and then they ask us to do a few things here and there, take some photos with that, do a post for that or whatever. But that's usually pretty easy.
All right, I got a few fun ones here for you as we wrap things up. If you're out on a big ride, we're talking like 6-7 hours, and you're gonna hit a gas station at some point, what are you dying to go in that gas station and find for both to eat and drink?
I usually fill my bottles up at either the hose bib outside or in the sink in the bathroom, just because it's free. And then I don't know, probably a Wawa pretzel. I don't know if you know what Wawa is, but
I know what Wawa is. Yeah. But that's a very East Coast answer.
Yeah. The problem is like where I ride, there's not that many Wawas. They're all like where I live.
Sure.
But then when I ride up into Pennsylvania, there's not that many Wawas. So
sure, you're probably getting too rural for a Wawa.
Yeah, it's surprising here. It's like pretty populated, but if you go ride like the back roads, you won't pass a gas station for 2 or 3 hours. If you got to hit you got to go through like a town or something. Once you get up into like Pennsylvania, Lancaster area, because that's kind of where I do my longer rides.
Okay, so you stopped. You've got the water hose for your bottles and a Wawa bar and a pretzel. How about, are you a music listener when you ride?
Yeah, if there's no podcast that I feel like listening to, then I'll listen to music.
Okay, and what kind of music are you gonna fire up if you have to?
Any and all. I'm not big into music, but just have something to stimulate my self while I'm riding.
Fair. What kind of podcasts are you listening to on the bike?
Variety also. Not necessarily, some, I guess, like a cycling podcast, but I try to, stay away from that just because not to consume my life. A hunting podcast.
Yep.
Financial podcast, news.
Sure.
Any and all, yeah.
This was so like spur of the moment. I don't think people will totally understand it. It's amazing. And I hope you have an amazing season out on the road. But thanks for joining us today, Scott.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you're new here, the Stable Cyclist Podcast is a podcast where we talk about bikes, life mentality, and when the occasion arises, we will dig deep on mental health. And as I said, we now have all 5 of the main hosts from the Bonk Bros in the catalog. So you can go back through and listen to 2 separate interviews with Dylan Johnson, 2 separate interviews with Drew Dillman, an interview with Adam Sabin, and Tyler Cloutier as well. If you like what you're hearing here on the Stable Cyclist Podcast, do me a favor, and if you're on a listening platform, please give us a 5-star review, please, and thank you, and make sure you're following the show as well. And if you're on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up, and make sure you are subscribed. I also have an Ask JP Anything episode coming up, so if you have any questions that you want to ask on literally anything, you can drop a comment down below, or you could send us a DM at The Stable Cyclist on Instagram, or you can send us an email. thestablecyclist@gmail.com is where you can find us there, and we will happily dive into those questions. And I can tell you right now, we've already had quite a few having to do with some of our Bonk Bros hosts, so I look forward to digging into those in the next few weeks. Last thing is always, more importantly than anything you heard today or anything you can remember this week, remember that you are loved.